So I'm just going to kind of talk you through personalization at Farfetch. So for those of you who don't know who we are basically the only global multi-channel e-tailer in the world, in the luxury space. And what we're really trying to do is we want to change the way the world shops for fashion. And the reason that we're slightly different to most luxury retailers is that we actually don't own any stock at all. So what we do is we go around the world and we curate the best independent global boutiques from around the world. So they come from places like Paris, Los Angeles, Italy, and as far flung as sort of India. So we're trying to basically go around the world, find all the best boutiques and curate them into one online experience for customers. So customers only ever have one checkout with Farfetch. We basically are working with over 100,000 SKUs at any one time. So the Farfetch catalog is huge for a retailer. We're also basically bringing all those items from over 300 boutiques, and these 300 boutiques are in over 20 countries. And we're then shipping out to 150 customer countries. So we're basically transporting products across territories, at scale, at various SKU levels, so it's a huge operation. But what's really, really important to us, ultimately, is that, especially in the luxury space, every single customer is unique, so personalization is absolutely critical for what we're trying to do. So how do we manage this, and how do we manage this at scale? We basically, just like Nick said, we really rely on a data-driven model to really understand what the customer's doing and understand the psychology of those actions to try and deliver a really personalized experience. And that sounds great, but we realize that's actually not that easy for most people. So there are basically three big challenges in trying to deliver that. Firstly, the customer behavior offsite has changed drastically. As you know, I'm sure we've talked about extensively today, people are browsing on multiple different devices, browsing on multiple different channel touch points. There's a huge mix in terms of how people are discovering your website. The second problem is once you get someone on your website, the customer behavior has changed again. So changing between devices, how do you track that? In terms of what they want to look at, what kind of content they want to browse, how they want to browse content, that's all changing. And finally, even if you have all this information, trying to work out a way to resource this is really, really difficult because, you know, everyone obviously, I don't know anyone who has a dedicated team for personalization. It usually sits somewhere between your marketing team, your product team, maybe you have some help from analysts, but trying to work out how to resource this is really challenging. So what do? We actually do something pretty simple. We listen to what the customer is telling us. Most of the time, if you can track it properly, the customer is telling you everything and more of what you would ever need to know. And when we gather all that information, we just make sure we analyze it, and we really use that information. We don't just gather it and stash it away somewhere. So to go back to those three challenges I mentioned before, in terms of off-site behavior and new visitors, what we do with that data is we work out how we can best manage those acquisition channels. We know how people are coming into the website. How do we make sure that we're in the right place at the right time to acquire someone? And when we get someone onto the site, how do we really manage that first visit experience? If we don't manage that first visit experience well, the likelihood is they'll never come back for us. To that second challenge, once we have them on the website, we make sure that, again, we really think carefully about our retention channels, making sure we're messaging people at the right time in their purchase cycles. And then we also make sure we track every individual interaction on the website. And for us, what's really important is that we think about visitors rather than individual visits, because you really want to start to weave a picture about a customer, not separate visits. And finally, in terms of resourcing, I think it's really important to find either a technology or an agency or someone who can kind of support you through with all of this. So for us, we outsource our efforts to Qubit, who really help us kind of action all of this. So I thought I'd talk you through some very specific examples around the kind of data that we do use, and then give you an idea of some of the tests that we've done to date around new customers, returning customers, international localizations, and then some things we've done around product. And then just a few ideas of things that we're thinking about for sort of the future of personalization at Farfetch. So if we dive right into the data, so at Farfetch, we definitely use a mix of qualitative and quantitative data. We try and give ourselves a really full picture of what the customer's telling us. So we'll use everything like market analysis. We're well aware that what works in the UK will definitely not work in China, so we really need to know our stuff. We listen to what people are saying about us on social media, so making sure that we're listening to what brand advocates are saying. If they're shouting about us, we should know what they're shouting about, good and bad. We use something called the Qubit exit feedback, which is basically where we just serve people a pop-up when they look like they're about to leave the site, and we just ask them for feedback on their journey. We additionally take feedback from customer services. So usually by the time people get to our customer services team, they're pretty vocal about how they feel. We also layer in RMF modeling, so we want to make sure that we really understand the value of the customer, especially when we're thinking about personalization. Those high-value customers in a business like ours are critical. Once we have someone on the site, we're also layering in things like product recommendations. We are monitoring every visitor interaction on the site through Qubit visitor history data. And then we're also layering other important bits of data like taxes and duties. Not all the data that we use for personalization is the most glamorous, but some of this stuff is actually the most functional for your customer journey. And finally, we layer in our CRM data. So if people have purchased from us, we should definitely be using that information. And again, this is a lot of data, so we won't use this for every decision, but we just want to make sure we have a really rounded picture of what the customer is telling us. So if we dive into the examples, firstly, if we talk about personalization for new customers. So obviously, new customers and new visitors are the most challenging because you really don't know that much about them, and you need to learn really, really quickly. So for us, one of the main challenges we encounter is that we're still a relatively young brand. We're trying to build brand awareness, and we know that without brand awareness, a lot of customers might not necessarily have that much confidence in us on that first visit. So what we need to try and work out are where are the points where we can basically encourage your propensity to purchase on that first visit when you're maybe not that confident with us as a brand. So what do? We basically, like I mentioned, we track every visitor interaction on the site through Qubit. So we took all that data and we did some propensity score matching to work out what content people who purchased in their first visit looked at versus people who didn't purchase. So just seeing, what do purchasers, how do they behave on the website versus non-purchasers? And what we identified was that there are a few key pages people visited. So what we did was we basically made an effort in surfacing that content to try and drive you through those pages. And the pages are it's pretty common, it's pretty basic stuff, but it makes a massive difference. So one of the messages we surfaced were that you can basically return using our free collection service. So on people's 10th page view, when they looked highly engaged, we would serve them this layer. And this has a massive impact in converters versus non-converters. Similarly, we would show them, read more about in our How to Shop FAQs, and learn more about how to shop with Farfetch. So 3 very simple messages, no new content on the website. All we're doing is serving users a simple layer, letting them know that they can easily click through and read more about these bits and pieces if it will help them convert. And so far, this has shown a huge uplift in conversion. So those 3 messages show a 17% uplift in conversion on your first visit. So again, this is not about creating anything new on your site. It's just about surfacing the right message to the right person. So secondly, with returning customers. Obviously, by the time you get to a returning visitor, you know way more about the customer. So you should absolutely be using all that information. So one of the big challenges we identified from looking at how people browse our site is that we know that shipping is a huge issue for Farfetch because we're obviously shipping from 20 different countries. So you might check out, and your checkout might include something that's coming from Italy, something that's coming from the US, and something that's coming from India. So the shipping costs are unfortunately quite high. And what we did was we looked at all the behavior of returning visitors, and we noticed that in the US, we were losing 25% of all our traffic at the basket page. And when we went and we had a look through the basket page, we looked through the journey, that's the first time ever in your user journey that you see shipping costs. We also know from our market analysis that the US customer expects free shipping. That's kind of standard in that market. So we knew with all that information that it was clearly the shipping cost at that point in the journey that was causing the issue. So again, we just gave users a very simple layer. So what we did was we looked at the visitor history testing to identify those non-converting users. We geo-targeted this pop-up at basket to to non-purchasers, and we basically just said to them, why not have free shipping on your first order? And again, we will never be able to roll out free shipping as a kind of a permanent feature for all customers, but if it helps you into that first purchase, it again takes down that barrier to entry on the first purchase. And this again is showing a 10% uplift in conversion. So again, a very small acquisition cost, but a huge impact on conversion rates. So obviously we've talked a lot about conversion rate and personalization, but I wanted to also share an example about personalization and localization. So one of our big issues is that we're serving customers in 150 different countries, and the expectation varies drastically by region. So what we wanted to try and work out is how we could surface the most relevant USP by region, by customer. And all we really did was we just worked out what the key messages were. So the key messages are, in all scenarios, shipping and returns, taxes, customer services, and product details. So what we did was we segmented by region, and we served users a localized USP based on their region. So to give you an example, this is the layer that we served out in Canada. And in Canada, the critical messages are that the prices include duties, so that people know that they don't have to pay tax when the product arrives. And they also want to know that the product is curated, that it's bespoke in a way. The same layer in Russia is actually, again, looks very similar, but the messaging is slightly different. So in Russia, we've stressed that we have Russian customer services. In Canada, nobody thinks that customer services won't speak English, but in Russia, they need to know that customer services speaks Russian. So this is a really simple change, but again, it has a big impact. And then the same layer in Japan includes that the product is authentic. So in Japan, a major issue is that they get loads of fake goods from mainland China. So they want to know in this layer that the product's authentic. So again, all three are factoring in the same kind of messages, but in very, very different ways. And again, this isn't about conversion, it's about adding value to that user journey. And finally, I wanted to talk you through a product-specific example. So like I mentioned, we have over 100,000 SKUs at any one time, so we're always trying to work out what is the best product to serve to the customer at any time. The other challenge we have is that we have over 2,000 designers, so filtering by designer still doesn't actually get you that far down. So what we tried to work out is how could we surface the right designer to you as a customer? Because if you've browsed Farfetch, you might be a customer who wants to spend $15,000 on an Alexander McQueen dress, or you might be a customer who wants to spend £150 on an Alexander McQueen bracelet. So how do we know where your price point sits? So again, what we did was we went back to the data, and we did some propensity analysis around the kind of brands we know people buy, and how that ties into other brands that they might buy. And we basically came up with some quite simple brand clusters. So we know, for example, that if you buy Saint Laurent, you'll also likely buy Alexander McQueen and Dolce & Gabbana. So what we did was we started emailing people, even if they'd only bought one of these brands, with their brand clusters. So we would basically, if we were going to send an email about dresses, their email about dresses would include their brand cluster. And what we found was that when we looked at people who received the generic dresses email versus an email with their brand cluster, we saw a 35% uplift in the opens on emails with brand clusters. And then when we looked at the converters from the generic emails versus the brand clusters emails, we saw a 50% uplift in conversion rate. So again, this is really, really, very simple, high-level stuff, but it has a huge impact in performance. So now that we've talked through a few real-life examples, I also wanted to kind of talk you through some of the ideas that we're thinking about. So one of the big things we're trying to roll out now is, like I mentioned before, those brand clusters. We want to take those personas and those brand clusters that we know from our CRM data and start to layer that into your on-site experience in real time. So that's a big project for us. We're also taking that localization to the next level and rolling out 3 fully localized sites in Japan, China, and Russia. We're starting to take all that attribution and behavioral data and also layer that into our personalization efforts, because we really want to know the real value of a customer and their purchase cycle behavior to optimize for that. We are ambitiously trying to build our own in-house recommendation engine as well to, again, take on all that understanding and that knowledge that we have about how people browse our website. We're also trying to look at cross-channel personalization, because, to my point earlier, people don't just search in PPC anymore. They'll go and they'll do a search in paid search, they'll visit an affiliate, they'll come through email, they'll have all these different touch points. So we want to work out what are those optimal journeys to make sure that we're being really efficient about our ad spend. And one of the big things that is definitely kind of on our long-term agenda is really thinking about discovery over search. So that whole user browsing behavior is changing quickly. So how do we, as a retailer, think about how we can factor that in? So it's the Pinterest over Google, like that change in how people want to consume content, we really need to be thinking about. So that is everything from me. But I would just say, more than anything, it's really, really critical, and I think the main thing we've discovered is that it's really important not to be afraid of your data. You really just your customers are telling you so much already, so just use that data that you have to really understand what the customer is telling you, and just make sure that you're always thinking about your customer as individuals rather than kind of big faceless groups. So that's it.
Thank you very much. Right, we do have a couple of minutes if anyone wants to have any questions for Rachel at all. Yes, please.
Hi there. I'm quite interested. Why would you want to build your own in-house recommendation engine, given that that's such a specialized area?
Yes. I think for one of the main issues we have, which makes us quite unique, is that we have 100,000 SKUs, but on average we only have a depth of about 3. Because our business model is that we don't own the stock, so the boutique buys the stock. So the boutique will buy, they could be as big as this room or they could be as big as your bedroom. Like, there's a huge variety in size, so we just don't tend to end up with a lot of stock depth because that's not how they buy. So a lot of the recommendations engines out there will think about like your stock depth, and that is kind of the main issue for us. So that's why we're looking at it in-house, because we're probably very unique like that.
Any more questions at all? Yes, please. So if you wait for the microphone, please, that would be great. Thank you.
Do you see in the future that you will actually own the data science piece, since you don't own the stock? Surely that's quite a strategically important part to give away to a third party.
So we don't sort of, I think from our perspective, we don't sort of give it away. It's very much collaborative. So we're starting to grow our internal team of analysts, but we do realize that we want to be very agile, and in some cases it does make sense to work with a third-party tech company. So we're very collaborative with Qubit. It's definitely not black box to us. But I guess the real benefit for us to using someone like Qubit is all the testing and the layers, that we can be much more agile using a technology like that. Whereas if we were to do it in-house, I'm sure everyone has the same problem with development sprints, but it just takes us a lot longer to get it moving.
Excellent. Well, on that note, Rachel, thank you very much for your insight. Thank you.